Welcome into the Irish NFL show as we continue our look at the AFC conference. And this division was arguably one of the most talked about divisions last season. I imagine it will be the same come this season, 2023 season, the AFC East. Colin, Connor, it's great to have you here with me for this recap of a very interesting division.
Lots happening in this division, obviously, in the off season. So plenty for us to delve into ever before training camps even begin.
Connor?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about this one. My old friend Aaron Rodgers, obviously still the owner of the Bears, as he tell you himself. So, obviously I wish ownership well in their new location.
Well, I'll start with you, Connor. And I was looking at the division order from last season, and the Jets did come last, but now in fairness, they were in the melting pot for quite a large part of the season, so maybe it's a little bit unfair to say they were the worst team in the division. But look, this long, drawn-out saga finally came to an end the week of the draft, which was the Aaron Rodgers trade. And it's not just Aaron Rodgers that's come over. I wouldn't say it's the entirety of the Packers team, but there's so many players that have jumped on this bandwagon. It does kind of remind me a little bit of the Tom Brady-esque situation in Tampa. But should we be as high on the Jets that, say, the NFL media are across the States, across Europe? Like, they do have a good team, really strong offense, and he's going to obviously fit into that. But it is very much a win now type of scenario.
It is, yeah. And I was thinking about this earlier, as in, what's the maximum level the Jets can get to here and fail, and for it still to have been a qualified success, right? Sorry, I know that's a kind of a very convoluted way to describe it, but if they get to a Super Bowl and lose, is that acceptable? If they get to the AFC Championship game and lose, is that acceptable? If they get to a divisional round and they go out, which has been the pattern for Aaron Rodgers since he actually won the Super Bowl, let's not forget, that's probably a bust for this year. Then he's going into the next year and you got a 40-year-old quarterback. A lot of this depends, obviously, as everybody's been saying, on what version of Aaron Rodgers we get. Do we get MVP Aaron Rodgers? Do we get what the narrative is telling us out of the off season, the big love in there, and everybody, himself included, looking refreshed and renewed, and this is the weight off his shoulders now, and he rolls into town, as you say, with some of the band back together. All the superannuated members of the Green Bay receiving core anyway went with him. And you quite rightly call out the Tom Brady comparison, because that example, that template clearly lives rent-free in Aaron Rodgers' head. Like, that seems to have been the genesis of all the trouble. Like, forget about drafting Jordan Love and what that did to Aaron Rodgers' mentality. That seemed to get the best out of him, arguably, as I've talked about previously on another podcast. The fact that Brady pitches up and Brady gets Leonard Fournette and Brady gets Gronk and Brady gets the Bucs to take a punt, and it was a massive punt when you think about it, even though it did work out until it didn't, on Antonio Brown. Rodgers is looking at that and going, why won't the Packers do that for me? Like, all they ever do is seem to push against me. Here I am, and I'm in my prime, and we have the window, and it's still open wide, and all we need is one or two more pieces, and Brady rocks into town and gets everything he wants, and they go and get the ring. The Packers do nothing for me. They finally draft an offensive player in the first round, and what do? They draft my replacement. And that seems to have really set the pigeons racing in his head and brought about this what seemed for years to be an inevitability, and now it's finally done. But a lot of what transpires, I think, in, I was going to say New York, New Jersey, this season will depend on the extent to which Rodgers shows the kind of leadership that got Brady where he is. Like, let's think about the things that Aaron Rodgers does well. Even I will admit, having, and I'll spare you my extended years of trauma, and, he's, 24-5 against the Bears over his career in the NFC North. But as good a quarterback as I've ever seen throw a ball, and I will absolutely give him that any day of the week. Fits the ball into incredible tight windows, has incredible vision, incredible pre-snap read. You look at all that stuff he does when nobody takes better advantage of a free play than him. Nobody's more accurate from Hail Marys, which is, supposed to be a contradiction in terms. You're just tossing the ball up, not when you're Aaron Rodgers. He is amazing. And if you get the best version of Aaron Rodgers, they're absolutely Super Bowl contenders. We all know that. But what happens when you get a bump in the road? A word that you don't associate with Aaron Rodgers is accountability. It's always someone else's fault. It was LaFleur's fault for not going for it on fourth down against the Bucs. It was the defense's fault. It was the special teams' fault. It was the receiving corps' fault. It's always someone else's to blame. When Rodgers, and we talked about it before again, but I'll say it once more, didn't show up for the OTAs last year when you had a young receiving corps. You heard Romeo Doubs, and to be fair, the Packers generally haven't thrown any dirt on his coffin since he left Green Bay, and you haven't heard angry words or vindictive words from any of the players, which is probably a good sign, and maybe is better reflective of the leadership he shows in the locker room than sometimes what we see outside. But one interesting and perhaps telling comment from Romeo Doubs was that Doubs said Rodgers barely even spoke to him. Like, that's not a way of getting your young receivers on board and engendering the type of team culture that sees you well when you need to show resilience. And you look at that Jets schedule, like it's like starting the week on leg day. It might be good for you, but do you really want to go there first up? Like, they have the Bills first up, they have the Cowboys, they have the Eagles, and they have the Chiefs all in their first 6 games. Like, obviously you're playing arguably the best team in your division, arguably the best team in the NFL, and arguably one of, if not the best team, depending on how they go in the other conference, all in your first 6 weeks. You come out of that 4-2, and then you're starting to believe. But you come out of that 1-5 or 2-4, and already looking for snookers. Then we'll see what kind of leadership Rodgers is really primed to provide in New York, and whether he is the guy that can deliver them that title. Because if we're talking about the Jets as contenders, we're denying the evidence of our eyes over how many years. You're expecting a team with a historically losing culture to suddenly flip it around. And look, let's face it, that's what keeps most of it involved and interested in the NFL every year. The idea, which is genuinely at times, when you squint and when you wish hard enough, just about possible to do in the NFL, and we can all call out examples of when it has actually happened. But that's what you're expecting the Jets to do, to turn history on its head and deliver the Lombardi back to New York for the first time since Willie Joe named it.
Colin Connor's made some really very valid points around the Packers and this lost relationship between Rodgers and some of the players over the course of the last few years, and in particular, he was very vocal about some of the preparation of the players in the last offseason during the training camp. Garrett Wilson was very excited about him coming in. Brees Hall's coming back from a serious injury, but looked a great running back. Very excited. On the other side of the ball, you saw Sauce Gardner. All these players that seem to want to play with Rodgers, and you called it out on the show, and Connor's rightly called it out. This kind of refreshed looking Aaron Rodgers that we saw from day one. But he has said a couple of little things already, little nuggets of information, during these voluntary camps around the level of expectation and the commitment the players have to show and the desire. I don't think necessarily anyone is kind of doing anything in particular that he's not happy with it, but he is already kind of pushing the needle. With Nathaniel Hackett there, who has the relationship, Robert Saleh, like, where ultimately do you see the pressure throughout the course of the season? Because Aaron Rodgers can very much step into it's my first year here if things don't go according to plan. Is it on Saleh because he has to be under a bit of pressure to deliver with the amount of players now Joe Douglas has put at his disposal?
I think there's pressure on all of them, right? Because Connor points out about Brady, right? And Brady walked into Tampa Bay and wins the Super Bowl in year 1. And I think there's so many things to this, right? The thing is, with Brady and Manning, people forget, or just choose to ignore, they were both free agent signings, right? There was no trade that you had to do. You didn't have to give up any capital. You were able to build teams around them immediately, which hasn't been the case with Russell Wilson, with Deshaun Watson, and now with Aaron Rodgers. You had to give up quite a lot. And so I do think there will be pressure on Rodgers himself. I think he can, and he looks refreshed because, look, he's walked into a situation where Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, Josh Johnson, Sam Darnold, Luke Falk, Trevor Siemian, Josh McCown. I mean, he is a peacock in a turkey pen. He can absolutely lord it over all of those, right? And he has a ring. And sorry, Connor, but the Jets are only the Bears have had this worse history of franchise QBs, right? And so he goes in there and he is hailed instantly because he has the ability, he has the ring that they don't have. But I do think there will be expectations. The Hackett thing, I'm intrigued to see how that goes, because remember when, they got on, and we've heard Aaron Rodgers talk very favorably about Nathaniel Hackett. That was the reason Nathaniel Hackett got the Broncos job, was the hope of enticing him in. But Hackett didn't call plays when, he was in Green Bay. So there is huge pressure on Nathaniel Hackett. And if they get off to a bad start, particularly if it doesn't look good on offense, I think that people will immediately start pointing fingers at Hackett, and rightly so. I mean, look, I mentioned it before, but it's worth highlighting. The crowd were counting down the play clock. That's how bad things were. The Jets cannot afford that. The Broncos had a number of kind of high-profile games at the start of last year. There's the immediate spotlight on you. That will be ever, ever brighter in New York, and with the opening games that Connor has outlined. And obviously for Salah, I mean, this was going to happen, right? And they had to upgrade at QB, obviously, and they've gone out and got Rodgers. But to Connor's question around, what for it to be considered justified, I think it has to be that they're at least in the championship game, but more realistically, probably in the Super Bowl. They can, if they lose it, they lose it. But I think they have to be there because of what they gave up, and the window is so small. Like, what are we talking about? 2-3 years, probably. He's 39 years of age, so it's not like they have brought in a guy who can play for 6-7 years. So it is a small window. Everybody from the GM to the head coach to the offensive coordinator to the QB is going to be under pressure. Pressure sometimes creates diamonds. That's what the Jets faithful are going to be hoping for.
Conor, I just want to ask you a question around the wide receiver combos that came in during free agency. And I just feel like a lot of these players were brought in to kind of satisfy Rodgers, in particular Randall Cobb. Like, I'm not sure how much he's got left in the tank. Alan Lazard has obviously been kind of one of his favourites. He got him in, and one that's kind of floating under the radar because of the amount of Packers players that have come in, because there is quite a few, offensive line, Turner on the defense, Amos. But Mecole Hardman has come in from the Chiefs, and whilst he's been inconsistent for the Chiefs at times, he's carried a lot of injuries. He's quite a dynamic player and someone that could take the top off a defense. Like, are we looking at a player there that maybe will step away from the kind of scrutiny and coverage that would be around the players that have come in from Green Bay, as opposed to a player who's played for the Chiefs, won a Super Bowl, and on his day can be really good in the league?
Yeah, I mean, he's the one acquisition there that you think actually adds to what they have, rather than just maybe cluttering up that wide receiver room. Do you really want to be taking targets away from Garrett Wilson, as explosive as he is? What you want to be doing is taking attention away from Garrett Wilson, which is what Hardman is capable of doing. Those others, as you say, big question mark over how much they have in the tank, and to the extent to which they're there just to placate Rodgers and replicate his version of the Tom Brady fantasy in New York. The other example that springs to mind, of course, that we haven't talked about is the Rams when they went and got Stafford to load up and go after the NFC. But that, to me, and to your point, Colm, is qualitatively different from what the Jets face here. Because if you look at the AFC and you're not the Chiefs, the Bengals, or the Bills, you got to go and beat the Bengals, the Chiefs, or the Bills, assuming that they all turn out to be as good. And we'll talk about the Bills shortly, as good as we kind of expect them to be this year. It's a tough conference to come out of, as we've been saying again and again and again. So what sort of record are you going to need to post to get to the playoffs in good shape? You don't want to be going there as a wild card in the AFC. It's just such a tough path. We talked, when we were talking about the AFC North, about the path that the Bengals had last year, and fair play to them, they damn near pulled it off. But you really don't want to be going on the road in the divisional round and in an AFC Championship game. We talked about the importance of the Chiefs playing all of those AFC Championship games at home, and what that has ultimately led to in terms of their appearances in the Super Bowl and their ability to convert them into wins. The Jets really don't want to start the season slowly. And, to your point, Colm, it's a very, very demanding media market. It's a demanding part of the world to be in. And there's no time to kind of figure it out. You got to fly the plane and get up to Mach 1 pretty quickly.
Colm, one thing that he really obviously did have in Green Bay for large parts of his time there was a really strong offensive line. And the Jets really have kind of suffered over the last couple of years. Like Mekhi Becton was one of the four that was, drafted in April 2020. He's had his weight problems. Looks like he's kind of back now and refocused. And they went centre in the second round. They brought in offensive line in the fourth round. A lot of Jets fans said they really wanted to see offensive line in the fourth round. It didn't play out that way, and they went defense. Is that something that's still a bit in flux? You know, Rodgers may play well, but he could be under constant pressure. Like, are we going to see an offensive line that's going to be bang on the money come week one? Because that sometimes takes that transition from a new quarterback. We saw it with Jensen in Tampa, how he couldn't get over the amount of stuff in which he was being fed by Tom Brady, and it was like, you know, compared to what he was so used to. Because that's something that's going to take a long time to gel, or are we going to see that kick in straight away? That's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you say it didn't play out that way. It didn't play out that way because Bill Belichick basically allowed the Steelers to go up and get Broderick Jones. And I think the Jets' thinking was probably somewhat similar to what the Bucs did with Tristan Wirfs. Get the young tackle in, have the experienced hand at QB there, but the talent will carry him. And obviously that didn't work out. Now, they brought in Billy Turner, who is serviceable, has a lot of experience, would have played with him in Green Bay, but that is a piece, obviously, that they're going to have concerns around, because, again, it doesn't matter how good a quarterback you are, you need the O-line. That's why the Chiefs went out and invested in it the way they did. That's why the Bengals have invested in it the way they did. So that is something that, you know, you'd have to keep an eye on. Now, defensively, they have been really impressive, and Sauce is just so good. And I think the pieces that they have added should help. And I think Salah is a very good defensive coach. So, you know, they need, given they are in the AFC, their offense has to be more than merely serviceable. That the days of, you know, we can rely on a really good defense and a serviceable offense, those are over. And so, yeah, you would have to say it is a little bit of a concern. They probably don't have the line exactly where they want it. And I think with Breece Hall coming back from an ACL injury, I go, you know, what's that look like? You know, unless you're Adrian Peterson, and there are very few Adrian Petersons, coming back off an ACL injury for a running back generally takes a little bit of time, no matter how talented you are.
I'm going to close out the Jets one with a bit of fun, guys. I know it's the end of June, but we've all commented on their schedule. I'm going to throw a few games at you, and I want a few bit of early picks come September. It could all be very different. They start off with the Bills at home. Do you think they'll win that game, Conor?
So what, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I may be showing my hand in terms of what I'm going to say about the Bills. I think they will win it.
Colin?
I think, yeah, I think that at home, I think the fact that they start at home, I'm going to say that they have a real shot with the way, and we're going to come to the Bills, but with the way things are playing out up in Buffalo, and with the way I expect the Bills to start the season, I think the Jets are in with a shot of winning that.
I'll go Bills. I'm going to give you up to their bye week because they are early in the season. Cowboys on the road, week 2.
No, they're losing that one in my view.
Colin?
I'm gonna have them at 2-0 after the first 2 weeks.
Pats at home week 3. I'll give them the win. Conor?
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you there. I think they'll win that one.
No, Bill Belichick is going. I mean, he is going to absolutely do everything he possibly can to ruin on the Jets parade. It's possibly the main motivating factor in the man's life. So I'm going to say no. Bill's going to get one over on them.
We'll have to come back to these now come September, October, and see where we're at. Glory Eyes on a Monday, Sunday Night Football at home to the Chiefs. Chiefs for me.
Well, that's an L for me as well, for the Jets, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, for me, they start 2-0, but after week 4, they're 2-2.
Colin might give us a one on this one. Broncos on the road. I'll give the Jets the win.
I'm giving that one to the Jets as well.
Well, in that case, I'm going to go. They start 2-0. They're now 2-3 after 5 weeks.
Right, Connor. And then they close out, here we go again. Like week 6, before their bye week, at home to the Eagles.
I have them starting pretty well, but I think they're going to book a loss there. What does that make me? I think I'm putting them 3-3 over those 6 games. I'm sitting on the fence, really.
I'm at 2-4.
I'm 2-4 as well. I don't think they beat the Eagles.
And I'll throw another one in. Do you know who they play the week after the bye week? The Giants. So that's a loss. So, yeah.
Okay, I think they're okay. So after their first 7 games, I have them probably 3-4. That's probably not what Jet fans want to hear. That may well change by the time we get to.
It's just, I suppose the reason why I wanted to do it. I know it's all a bit of tongue in cheek come the end of June, but like we touched on before we start recording, like it's a really tough schedule, and we haven't even got into the second part of the season, and they're playing predominantly most of the games at the start of the season at home. And I know that can go a very different way. Like some teams tend to be better on the road, in the second half of the season as opposed to being under pressure playing home games. It just talks about the enormity of what they had them in a competitive division. We haven't even got into many divisional games there. Just the one in. Sorry, we had the 2, the Patriots and the Bills. We're going to come to the Patriots now. Key storylines for me this offseason would be, I suppose, the return of Bill O'Brien. And we saw last year, and this time last year, Colin rightly called it out on the show around the fact that this storyline had kind of been introduced around. It wasn't a storyline, but it really was. And Mark, one of our former colleagues on the show, kind of dismissed it immediately as there's no storyline here. Bill Belichick knows what he's doing, but he didn't know what he was doing. And at the end of the season, he corrected it and brought in Bill O'Brien. And Mac Jones last year, you could see the frustration. He just didn't seem to be sure who was calling the plays at times, and he was a bit erratic. And I think having the 2 guys there didn't help his development. So I'd imagine a bit of an upward turn this year. And they have brought in some really strong players offensively. They've done quite a lot this offseason. Like you got the tight ends coming from Miami. I'll let you pronounce the name escapes me. Big guy that Mark Cochran used to love. Gesicki.
Yeah.
Gesicki. Schuster's come in from the Chiefs. I mean, they've done I'll start with you, Colin. Like, is it a case of Mac Jones was the concern last year? We saw the quarterback scenario where he was in, he was out, which was the Zappy experience. Like, if the offense is to return to winning ways in terms of putting up good numbers, are we going to see a kind of a reverse to form in terms of the Patriots being more productive and back challenging for this division?
They'll be competitive because they'll always be competitive under Bill Belichick, but and getting O'Brien in is a good move, right? He's a very good offensive mind. Now, he didn't overlap with Mac Jones in Alabama, but you know, they both products of the Alabama system as such. So I imagine that you will see Mac Jones take a step forward. Last year was very bizarre, right? In all the decisions that Belichick made, that decision to at one stage pull, Mac Jones, and then Zappy comes in, the crowd go bananas up until Zappy is terrible. So nobody really knew what was going on. And, while obviously you need, there needs to be accountability, you need your quarterback to step up. When they don't know if you're going to pull them mid-game or not, that doesn't help anybody. So it will be interesting to see, I suppose, how they do. And yeah, they have added in some pieces, though you wouldn't say any of those pieces are absolute superstars. And serviceable, workmanlike. We'll see. The piece where they're very light is, and they brought in Calvin Anderson from the Broncos, but you would, I wonder, in terms of their 2 starting tackles, I suppose are guys who Trent Brown, Riley Ref have missed time in the past. Now, last year they actually, in fairness, they didn't, but would you count on them doing that again? So that is a piece where there are some concerns. To me, yeah, Mac Jones will be better. Yeah, the offense will be better. We know the defense should be decent, but will it be good enough?
Connor, they did go very defensive heavy in the draft. Colin touched on the trade with the Steelers, but Christian Gonzalez was a player that was expected to go top 10. Again, out of Oregon, he falls to 17, a cornerback. And one thing the Patriots have always done quite well is they find these cornerbacks, they nurture them, they turn them into the great players. And then funny enough, and Colin called it out, I think about a year or so ago when Jackson went to the Chargers, they seemed to go off and get the money somewhere else and never seemed to play out to be the same player in which they were under the Patriots and under Belichick. Keon White was a guy, and it was expected to go fourth round. He goes second round to the Patriots. You've got Matt Judon there, a really strong nucleus there with other players that can do a good job. Like, is it very much reliant on this offense, because the defense, you would imagine, 9 times out of 10 will play well enough to keep them in the games, like they did for large parts of last season.
Yeah, I think so. And look, even with the decent defensive performance last year, I mean, they didn't really get the maximum out of some of their role players. Strangely enough, Matthew Judon looked a little bit off at times towards the back end of last season. Certainly wasn't producing at the same level he was when they went on their unlikely playoff run the previous year. I think Bill O'Brien has to make a difference on the offensive side of the ball as well. She's like, the Matt Patricia experiment just didn't work out at all. It probably counts as one of the worst calls Belichick has made in his time there. And that just really fell flat in its face. And you could see what it did to Mac Jones. He was so frustrated, and then he was picked up a couple of times with pitch side microphones kind of giving out about what he was being asked to do. And it really threw him. And this is a player who, in my opinion, has, quite a high floor, but probably a low ceiling. Like, I think you get, a serviceable level of Mac Jones, and at times he can elevate his play and do some special things, but probably not consistently enough to make a ripple in terms of the elite quarterbacks that are even in that conference, never mind in the league as a whole. So what you need around that then is some real dynamism and some proper scheming, and crucially some weapons, which Belichick's always loved his tight ends, and he loves his 2 tight end sets, and Gesicki definitely looks like a Patriot. He looks like the kind of player that you can see thriving in that offense, and with Bill O'Brien, who, if memory serves me, was the guy who had Hernandez and Gronk in that fearsome tandem back in the day when they made their Super Bowl run that just fell short that one particular season. And they've got Smith-Schuster in, as you say, so they look a lot better set on that side of the ball. And yeah, you don't have to squint too hard to see the Patriots getting to 9-8, right? That they seem to be able to do that in their sleep. Whether you get any more than that then is the question, because that's not what they're in this for. They're not in this to be mediocre. That's not who they are. That's not what their culture is. That's not what Belichick is all about. So, as you say, one of the things that will be his legacy is his ability to develop players. I've said it before, we always talk about draft and develop is the sustainable way of success, but people overweight on the draft, and you got to hit in the draft. It's not about hitting in the draft. It's what you do once you get the players in the building, the good locker rooms, the good cultures, the consistently good teams. Steelers, the Ravens, the Packers, the Patriots obviously are the ones that, turn those lumps of coal into diamonds and chisel them out over a year or two. And you forget as well, it's not just about who they've drafted this year, it's who they drafted last year who's going to take a step forward this year, because that's what they do. That's what's made them who they are. So you're looking for the players that are already around and have another year under their belt to step forward, and the players who, young and all as they are the leaders in that locker room, like the Judons, to find their best form. And again, we talked about the Jets and how you're betting against history, expecting them to suddenly turn it around and be champions. You're betting against history, expecting the Patriots to be chumps, even though it was an underwhelming season last year. They still have a lot of pieces there that you could assemble a very competitive team from, and you're not going to bet against Belichick doing that.
Colin, you touched on there was they're really good players in their own right in terms of who they brought in free agents. They don't have kind of a standout number 1 wide receiver. At the time of recording, DeAndre Hopkins still hasn't signed for any particular team, and last week there was a lot of noise that he was going to sign to Patriots. It hasn't materialized. It may come around again. Would you see him, despite the kind of time he's had in Arizona, as that kind of player that could come in and be the guy, the number 1 wide receiver that they really require, or is he going to be another guy that would share, I suppose, the plays and the looks from a quarterback standpoint, or will he become the vocal point of the offense? Is that fair to say?
I think he'd be very much the number 1 if he was to go there. And we've seen Belichick bring players in before towards the end of their career, and be pretty successful in terms of doing that. Now, we remember also, though, a couple of years ago when they went out, remember they spent a huge amount of money in free agency, and obviously that didn't really work. So you have to be careful. But I think Hopkins could make a lot of sense. Now, at the time, as we were recording this, I see there was a video of him in New York today with people speculating on the Jets. But I mean, look, it's silly season. It's who knows. The other piece is obviously like their running back room is going to look very different as well, and that's something that where they've traditionally kind of done running back by committee, and they kind of did that maybe before anyone else. But they've moved on from some, and they brought in Robinson, who was down in Jacksonville, and at one point looked a very good running back. But then injuries seemed to, it's really difficult to know what exactly it was. Was there more to it than injury? Because at one point, even after coming back, he seemed to be doing okay. But he really fell off last year. He went up to the Jets, and even after the Hall injury, I think he ended up playing only maybe 4 games, and he less than 100 yards total in those 4 games. Patriots bring him in, and he doesn't even last until the end of OTAs. So let's see. There are still lots of players out there on the market. So, and we've seen guys who started on practice squads end up doing a job in terms of running backs. But I do think that if Hopkins was to come in, that would be a really legitimate kind of number one, because I think Smith-Schuster he's no longer the player who I think at one point with the Steelers, he had nearly 1,400 yards in a season at one point. I don't think he's that type of player. I think he's a very solid number 2. But I do think Hopkins would make a big difference to this team.
Yeah, and one interesting one, we'll probably come to it when we speak to Bills. Damian Harris, who was a really productive running back for the Patriots, now signed with the Bills. So it'll be interesting to see the impact of that within the division. And we did a few games, so I just call out, not necessarily picks, but just calling out their schedule. They start with the Eagles at home, Dolphins at home, and the Jets on the road. I mean, Colin's given the win against the Patriots, against the Jets in week 3, but Connor, there's a scenario there where you can see them losing all 3 games.
Jeez, the computer really hates the AFC East this year, doesn't it? They seem to all start with horrific schedules to begin, which is interesting enough when you're measuring up that division. Maybe 3-3 after 6 games isn't a bad place to be in the AFC East. They may all be taking wins off each other and taking scalps.
Yeah, absolutely. Tough start to the season. And the Dolphins is the next one up. They made the playoffs last year, put in a really sterling performance in Buffalo when no one gave them much of a chance with Skylar Thompson as the quarterback. And we spoke about it on the Monday after the show. If it wasn't for some kind of poor play calling and game management towards the end of the game, they potentially could have went on and won that game. And I think this is all about too. They pick up the 5th-year option. He was in and out of the team last year. I don't think the Dolphins came out, looking very good in terms of how they managed the concussion scenarios. And then we had Teddy Bridgewater getting a concussion in Cincinnati as well. But on their day, offensively last season, we saw some really strong performances with Tyreek Hill and Waddle in Baltimore in particular, where they put up 50-odd points, came back from 3 touchdowns down. They've got the players, looking to you, Connor, first. They've got the team, the attributes. Not a lot of activity in free agency, but Mike McDaniel going into the 2nd year, you would expect a little bit more stability and a team that you would expect to be challenging the Bills again this year.
Yeah, I think so. But as you say, it comes down to, and given the nature of the brain injuries that have plagued them, and let's stop calling them concussion. It's brain injury. Let's hope he's healthy, because that's not something you want to see anybody carrying around with, and you hope he's well protected and by the protocols as well in the NFL, doesn't end up in any sort of trouble. But it's either into Anua, if you'll permit me the Kupla Fuckle, since I'm just back from the Gaeltacht this week, having picked up the young scholar from our household, or else they're going to have to look for quarterback Nua to take them to the next stage. You rightly referenced that playoff game, which showed us a lot about the character and what they have. I love Mike McDaniel. He's just relentlessly entertaining. He's these crazy kind of gnomic utterances on and off the pitch. Now, one of my highlights for last year, and not just because it involves Justin Fields and the Bears, was that little sideline tete-a-tete they had, the really funny one where Fields is tearing them up, rushing all over the place. And McDaniel literally says to him, "Stop it." and the two of them shared a good laugh about like who does that in the heat of battle. Like I love watching him. I love his offensive mind and the way he schemes. It's that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle combination. It's so exciting to watch. It's just turbocharged. Speed kills, as everyone says, and it's easy to say that, well, if two is thrown to those guys, like anybody could light it up with, but he showed at times. And isn't there something as well? There's something nice about watching a left-handed quarterback throw the ball as well. It does present a different picture, and it creates different offensive possibilities on the field. It does somehow bizarrely seem to throw defenses off a little bit. They're one of the teams that I'm really looking forward to seeing this season. I don't think they did an awful lot because I don't think they needed to do an awful lot. If Tua can stay healthy and if he continues in his development, I think they were right to pick up his fifth-year option because it's absolutely the best choice available to them, considering what they would have had to give up to do something else to get someone of a similar or higher standing to put them in the zone. But I think there's a lot to play with there, and there's a lot to play for, and I expect them to do well this year, I have to say. But all of that depends on Tagovailoa.
Colin, their marquee free agency signing was David Long, the linebacker that came in from Titans, and it was a kind of a position of need last year. They got gashed in the run game at times, but two players stood out for me, and it was more offense. And they did seem they brought in some Sarahsville offensive line guys, but Robbie Anderson comes in, who's he's been up and down over the course of the last few years. I think he's changed his name again recently, and Braxton Berrios has come in, who on his day for the Jets was a really productive player and a nice little slot receiver. Are you surprised they didn't do more in defense? And then obviously there was no first round pick because of the SAG in which they were inquiring with Tom Brady, and it was deemed to be they were breaking all the rules and had the first round pick taken away. But I would have thought, Brendan, when the way the season ended, where defense became more of a problem than the offense at times, they would have focused a little bit more on that. But they kind of went the other way. They're trying to stack up an offense and outscore teams in a division where you need to be putting the arguably 30 points maybe against a Jets offense and a Bills offense.
Well, there's two things to it. They got Jalen Ramsey, and obviously that's a big piece. Now, we will have to see how that goes, right? Because Jalen Ramsey last year didn't look like the Jalen Ramsey of old. And, that's it. We live now, because of social media, we live in an age where a cornerback gets burned once and they're done, and it's always, but like all cornerbacks are going to get done. Like the nature of the game is that's just going to happen, and especially with the emphasis on it. So I am interested to see what he's got left in the tank. He's 28. We know he is very talented. We know he's also very opinionated, and if people remember him showing up in the Brinks armored truck when he was with Jacksonville, and he wanted the new contract. So he's back in Florida. The other piece is obviously they brought in Vic Fangio, and that I suppose they are hoping that Vic's defensive capabilities, maybe that is why they weren't as active, because I suppose Fangio has an ability certainly on the defensive side to find players and kind of undrafted guys or guys who are free agents and bring them in and have them play well. But I think there will be a lot of pressure, because it is going to be, I think they will get a lot of focus this summer. I really do. Mike McDaniel is, he's very funny. He's very witty. He's great in front of a microphone. It's going to be kind of a double act with him and Fangio, who's notoriously kind of gruff. So I think the media, that will play well. And I think they're probably, where with Tua and where what the pieces around him, like his health is what's paramount. But they're kind of, the expectation would be obviously that they would, make a real push. Last year was the opposite to the Brian Flores years, in that under Flores, remember, they used to start terribly and then they'd go on these amazing runs towards the end of the season. And last year, obviously with the injuries, the wheels really came off in the back end of the season. I think it was the low scoring game against the Jets that kind of ultimately got them over the line. they went in with their backs against the wall in the playoff game, and they performed. So they should be like in theory, they have a great offensive-minded head coach, right? Who can scheme, who can come up with ideas. They have a defensive-minded coach who is a brilliant schemer, who, so they have the coaching in place. They have a lot of the players in place. I think the expectation has to be that they would make a serious push this year, and they should be capable of doing it.
Connor, is the Mike White signing as a quarterback kind of recognising the fact that there's no guarantee Tua will play the entirety of the season because of the number of injuries he picks up, and they're trying to bring in someone who they believe they can step in and win games from, because there was a few bright spots for the Jets, and on his day he looks like a quarterback. I mean, I remember last year they lost the game in Buffalo and he got absolutely destroyed by the Bills defense and still found a way to keep them in the game towards the end. Similar enough in Minnesota, like he has his attributes. He could be a quarterback that could do good stuff for them.
Yeah, look, to coin Colm's phrase from earlier, he's one turkey who got out of the pen and looks like he can actually gobble a few things up if he gets going. Like, he's a serviceable backup, and what you want is a guy who can come in and just not crash the car into the first tree that he sees, right? That can, and he's got the weapons around him. Let's face it, it's not the worst offense to be coming into if Tua does go down. With Skylar Thompson, they were never going to go anywhere in the playoffs, and yet, as you pointed out, they almost did. Although, and we'll come to the Bills very shortly. I think that maybe says a little bit more about Buffalo than it does about Miami. To be 100% fair, but I think it's a good signing. Like, backups get paid in the NFL, as we know, and it's not that easy to find a good one. You watch guys like Mike Glennon, and they just keep bouncing around, getting gigs somehow or other. Mike White is one of the better pickups, I would have thought, in the offseason. A smart move by the Dolphins.
Colin, before we close out, just keep with the team of their schedule. 3 of the first 4 games on the road. Chargers week 1, Patriots week 2, your Broncos at home week 3, and then on the road again in Buffalo. How many wins?
I think they're going to be really disappointed by that, to be honest, because playing at home for them in September is an enormous advantage. Like, we've all seen it. Like, the way they're the road team, their sideline is right in the sun. It can get up to 120 degrees on that sideline, and you've seen teams really struggle. Like, they're just bringing out these, the huge tubs of ice towels, and guys just immediately kind of putting it on their heads once they step off the field. So I think that they'll actually probably be another team in the AFC East who's unhappy with the way in which the schedule has fallen for them. It's tough to know where. I do think because again, I do think there'll be an awful lot of scrutiny given where all these teams, the East Coast does get a lot of scrutiny. But as I said, with Mike McDaniel and Vic Fangio there, and with the Tua stuff, I think they need to start quickly. I think they really would want to be sitting 2-1 after the third week, because otherwise, again, the doubts will creep in. You'll start to get the questions around Tua and the following year, and that becomes the focus. And we saw that with Lamar, last year. That will just be the never-ending question. That's just going to come up time and time again.
I'm going to say they start the season 2-0. I don't think going to SoFi week 1 is as difficult in terms of the atmosphere that you're going into against the Chargers team that I think are still a little bit up and down. I think they'll have enough to beat the Patriots. And we come to the Bills, the defending champions of the division, and there is so many storylines around this team. And I'll start with you, Connor. But for me, it's quite a lot of negative stuff going on. I mean, we've seen recently over the past week the storylines come out that McDermott took ownership of the defensive calls with 13 seconds to go in that playoff game, and it's kind of caused a little bit of animosity with Leslie Frazier, and that's kind of one of the underlying issues as to why he walked away from the team. And then you've got Stephon Diggs, who last year on a number of times was a bit outspoken. We saw Thanksgiving Day, the end of the playoff game, and then last week was a bit strange. I know we spoke about it. He's here, he's not here. Sean McDermott kind of had to backtrack on where he said the first day and said, "Oh no, I was aware he was here." Just doesn't feel like it's the Bills of the last couple of years. Whilst they have a great team, it doesn't feel like everything is, right inside in the organization.
No, it doesn't. And you'd have to say, and I'll put my cards on the table here. If you'd asked me before last season, I'd pick the Bills to win the Super Bowl. I thought it was going to be a Bills 49ers Super Bowl and that the Bills would win. So I was wrong on pretty much all counts there. Are they in better shape this year than they were last year? I don't think so. They're one of the teams in this division that I look at and go, to put it kindly, they've plateaued and they may even be slipping backwards here. I mean, when they signed Von Miller last year, you thought, yeah, that's kind of like we were talking about the Rams. That's a team going for that one extra piece because they really feel that they just need to add one more element to push them over the top, and they're really going to go for it this year. And they were slightly unlucky there because he got injured, obviously, on Thanksgiving and didn't come back and doesn't look to be fully back either. Might not actually start week 1 for them, which will be a concern. Even when they do get him back, though, it's almost like adding a new player in, given the impact he could make, bearing in mind that we have to see at his age whether he comes off the injury in full power, and that is something of a question mark. Apart from that, they haven't moved in the offseason like a team, like you would expect a team to, if they really want to push it and put all the chips in the center of the table. They haven't. They've been linked to DeAndre Hopkins, who looks like the kind of player you would think that an offense like this would want to slot in as that one extra guy, the Odell Beckham Jr. as the Rams had, or the Antonio Brown that the Bucs had, or pick whichever other example you want that just gets you there and gives you that extra dimension to cut it through and go over the top. But they haven't done that, and now you're dealing with all the off-season stuff that you quite rightly point out. Stephon Diggs isn't happy. Leslie Frazier doesn't look like he was happy. And this play calling on both sides of the ball now seems to be an issue. Diggs doesn't like the way the plays are being called as a wide receiver, although nothing new there. Wide receivers who don't get targeted on every single play will always have a problem with the offensive coordinator and with the play calling, if particularly if the team doesn't win. But I mean, those 2 playoff games last year, to me, kind of were said very worrying signs about who they are. They were very lucky to get over the Dolphins ultimately, and undermanned Dolphins without Tua, as we've just talked about. And the Bengals, we mentioned it when we were talking about the North, went into their building and just handled them. I mean, they got thrown around there. They were 17-point defeat. They were embarrassed. They never looked remotely competitive in that game for all that they had shaped up as Super Bowl contenders before the season. So I don't know, has that just put the doubts in their mind? Has that, maybe shattered some of the unity that they have and some of the sense of purpose that they have? Apart from everything else, given the situation with Damar Hamlin, you would have thought that this was a team that was galvanized going into the playoffs and would really have the sword as sharp as it could possibly be. And it ended up being completely blunted in that, very humbling loss in their own building. Like I really see these as a team that, no secret to where I'm going here, is not going to be in the same place that they were last year. I don't see them as the same level of contender that they were. They're still a dangerous team. They've still got so many pieces in place and talent on all sides of the ball, but something seems to be dimmed there, that the light isn't burning as bright, and I remain to be convinced otherwise.
Colin, Connacht rightly calls it Von Miller. They brought in Jordan Phillips, Shaq Lawson, the players that have been around there before and returned to the team. And I suppose they're trying to build a stability there within the defense, because we did see in quite a few games towards the end of the season that they just didn't perform at the level we saw earlier in the season. I think one of the standout acquisitions is Conor McGovern. The offensive line is coming from the Cowboys, one of the marquee offensive line guys on the market last March. Where are you on this? Are you concerned? Like, we saw Josh Allen at times, even in that Bengals game, he was very argumentative with Bengals, but I get the intensity of a game, but he didn't seem right at times last season. He seemed to be up and down. It was the Jets game as well, where he was shown. We spoke about needless interceptions last year. We touched on whether it was the Brian Dable effect that he'd moved on and he had a different offense coordinator, and things just never seemed to be. He didn't seem to, for me, be the same mature quarterback we saw under Dable. Is that fair to say? Do you think that was the case last year?
Yeah, but I think there were reasons for it, right? I think the 13 seconds played on their mind so much last year, right? Think about the way they opened the season last year. That first game, they played, and I've said it before, but I said it again, they played with their hair on fire. they were sensational in that opening game, and they looked. And I had them I had them and the Eagles in the Super Bowl. They were favorites. They were people looked at them in the AFC. They were the favorites to get to the Super Bowl, and they came out in that first game, and they looked like that was the case. But as the season went on, and remember all the stuff around the weather, the players having to be picked up on snowmobiles in order to be taken to the airport. Everything just seemed to
thunder snow. There was thunder snow.
Thunder snow, yeah. I mean, games having to be played away. There were so many different factors in it. It just seemed to kind of wear them down. And Bill Barnwell had a really kind of interesting piece around the way in which Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs responded to the too high shell look, right? Because the Chiefs obviously moved on from Tyreek Hill. And what the Chiefs did was, instead of getting standouts other than Kelsey, because he just can't cover Kelsey, but with the receivers, they made it so that, like, previously it was, okay, if we can shut Hill down, that takes the deep option away. And ultimately the other guys aren't good enough. Whereas last year, the receivers were all good enough to require you to cover them, right? And that's very difficult for a defense to do it. And what they also did was they moved off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and they we've talked about it before, they brought in an absolute bruiser of a running back, right? And so you can take advantage therefore of the lighter boxes, and you force teams into not being able to play the too high shell all the time. And then when Patrick Mahomes gets the opportunity, the Bills, it depends on have they learned the lesson, right? So Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs did will Josh Allen. Last year, he forced it too much, right? And if he didn't see it open, he took off running. That was all they seemed to do. Now, they have brought in Damian Harris in the offseason. They've made some changes to the O-line. The Diggs thing is an interesting piece, and I would love to know what happened exactly. We don't know. But to me, I suppose the fact that they brought in Dalton Kincaid in the first round is an indicator that they're going to change it. They're going to look for a lot more power up in their offensive plan for the new season. I think they'll change how they approach it. I mean, Connor pointed out that Von mightn't start the season. I think they'd be okay with that, right? Because last year, again, Von was there from the off. Like Von Miller and the likes of Frank Clark last year, those type of players come alive really in the playoffs. That's where you want those guys to come alive. And they kind of wasted it last year. So I think they'd be quite happy, to have a Von come in maybe towards the back end of the season. So I think they need to take a different approach. But there are things. I mean, that the fact that McDermott took over the 13 seconds, that's only coming out now. There are certain things that worry me. There are other moves that they've made that I can say, that makes sense. We'll have to see how things kind of play out in training camp and early in the season. But I think their approach will be different this year.
And let's not forget to be in London week 5 against the Jags. But before that, I think you're talking about the kind of tough schedule. I think they may have landed the easier start of the season. We touched on the Jets week 1, Raiders week 2, Commanders week 3, Dolphins week 4. I could see a scenario where they could be at least 3-1 going to London, potentially. I'll just ask you before we wrap up, who's your favourites for the division? I know I'm in the betting aspect of what's out there, but right now, bearing in mind everything that's been done this offseason, do you still see the Bills as slight favourites? I think, Connor, I'm going to get the impression you're not leaning that way. Are you going with it? Would you see the Jets as the favourites? Tough one. It's a tough one.
They're the obvious favourites on paper, but kind of like the Lions rather being the obvious favourites in the NFC North. I find it hard to given the evidence of everything we've seen in our NFL following time to get behind that. I'm going to be brave here and say I think the Dolphins will win the division.
Here's your wild card in June, Colin. Not necessarily a pick, just who you think is the favourites.
I think as we sit here today, I still have the Bills as the favourites because there's not enough there for me to say that the others have stepped forward enough. It's until you prove it. I think the others have certainly crept up, and maybe but maybe not being the favorites helps the Bills in some way. Like, I don't think the Chiefs being the favorites, right, for the AFC and for the Super Bowl impacts the Chiefs in any way, shape, or form. There are certain teams, be it in the NFL, be it in the Premier League, the World Cup, even in the All-Ireland, right? Certain teams enjoy being the favorites and are fine with it, and other teams almost need to be an underdog. There need to be that perceived kind of us against the world a little bit. Like, remember the Patriots looking to create that, right? Remember the "we're still here" nonsense. The plucky Patriots with Tom Brady and all his rings that he had at that time, and Gronk and everything else. We're still here. And sometimes teams kind of need that almost. So it might suit the Bills. To me, they remain favorites. But again, you never know what happens in training camp, what happens with Diggs. That could be different when we're sitting here doing our kind of season preview in August.
I'll remind you on that point, though, Colin, of Travis Kelce's outburst after the Chiefs beat the Bengals. Like, they had talked themselves into being perceived as underdogs in their own building last year because it suited their own narrative.
True. Though you didn't necessarily, you saw Travis do that. You didn't see Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes kind of buy into
nobody gets
same.
a word in once Travis gets the microphone. Anyway, we saw that at the White House.
I think they're very happy to have Travis be the clown in that situation.
Well, look, I will lean Bills as well slightly. I think the Jets probably should be favourites, genuinely based on what they've done, but I think the outside noise and the expectation that comes with it might just be a bit too much for the team over the course of the season. Colin says we're still here. We are still here. We're coming up to an hour, and I said at the start of this episode, this is probably the most talked about division last year and this year for the next season, and that's when I'm reflective of the fact that we did an hour. Colin, I really appreciate your time as we covered the AFC East.